Another lie. And by the way, Meghan, if you don't like me calling you a liar, just sue me and we'll go through all this in court.
Piers Morgan is absolutely furious, and this time, the intensity of what he is saying is being amplified by claims that multiple high-level sources are aligning behind the scenes, with royal insiders and reports emerging at the same time from both the United States and the United Kingdom, creating a sense that something much bigger is unfolding beneath the surface. What makes this moment stand out is the growing attention around activity reportedly taking place behind the walls of Buckingham Palace, not in a loud or public way, but through a process that is being described as quiet, controlled, and highly deliberate, the kind of movement that does not seek headlines but can carry serious implications once it fully comes into view. According to these discussions, the focus is not centered directly on Harry or Meghan themselves, but rather on matters connected to their children, including questions surrounding official documentation, titles, and how everything aligns within the broader structure tied to royal protocol.
Princess Lilibet Diana had been christened. Why would they use a title for their children that represents an institution they loathe so much?
The narrative being pushed suggests that attention is being directed toward understanding how these elements fit within established systems, particularly when it comes to formal recognition and placement, turning what might seem like a distant topic into something that is now being watched far more closely as new details continue to surface. And when you begin to hear what is allegedly being discussed behind the scenes, claims of missing signatures, questions surrounding documentation, and details about key events that some say are difficult to verify, you start to understand why this situation is being described as far more serious than it first appeared, creating a level of tension that is now reportedly being felt behind closed doors. The intensity of these reports, whether confirmed or not, has added fuel to an already growing narrative. And it is exactly this kind of uncertainty that is said to be driving a wave of pressure, as every new detail continues to raise more questions than answers.
Harry and Meghan Markle's surrogacy scandal has entered the mainstream media domain.
Stay with me, because according to ongoing discussions, each layer of this story appears to connect back to points that Piers Morgan has been raising for months, repeatedly pushing a line of questioning that has not been widely addressed in mainstream coverage. At the center of it all is one core question that continues to surface, one that he has consistently brought forward while others have remained more cautious, and it is that unanswered angle that is now drawing even more attention as the situation continues to unfold.
This crisis won't die down until the irrefutable truth comes out.
It all comes down to a question that sounds simple on the surface, but becomes far more complex the longer you sit with it. If Harry and Meghan continue to use their Sussex titles across major deals, brand partnerships, and public positioning, while at the same time presenting themselves as being at odds with that very institution, then what does that contradiction actually mean in practice? That is the angle Piers Morgan has been pushing relentlessly, framing it not as a minor inconsistency, but as something much bigger, arguing that there is a clear disconnect between the message being presented and the way those titles continue to be used across high-profile opportunities and platforms. From his perspective, those titles are not just part of their identity, but a central element of how everything is positioned, appearing in statements, negotiations, and launches in a way that reinforces their value as a recognizable brand.
How does it get there, Omid? Surely you as the author, you must be furious, right? You must be demanding. Heads roll. And you want names, don't you, ironically? Omid, about who did this to you? Who besmirched your reputation as an author? I would, Omid. I'd want to know right now, especially if I was trying to convince the world that I had nothing to do with it myself, and I'd never ever put these names in writing, and maybe some lawyer had come along and told me not to. That couldn't possibly have happened because you've given us your word, and as I've established so far in this monologue, your word is your bond and should be taken as sacrosanct. Well, I'm going to cut through all this crap. I'm going to tell you the names of the two senior royals.
The argument being made is that this is no longer just about personal identity, but about how that identity is leveraged, and now attention is shifting toward whether that same model could extend into the next generation, raising broader questions about how titles, influence, and public positioning are expected to evolve moving forward. The conversation begins to shift even further when attention turns toward the next generation, with names like Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet being brought into the spotlight, and with that comes a new layer of discussion around titles, visibility, and the potential value attached to them in the public space. Piers Morgan has been particularly direct on this point, arguing that this is no longer just about identity, but about how those titles function in a broader context, especially when they begin to intersect with branding, recognition, and long-term positioning.
These were dealt with a bit more, you could call it aggressively, when it came to errant members of a royal family. You sent them off to war and hoped that war took care of the rest, sort of thing. And so I think in this sort of modern era, you do actually need some way to discipline may sound like a harsh word, but to share with them, hey, you're part of this. You have to be a situation like Harry, because Harry and Meghan left in part because they thought they could just do whatever the heck they wanted. Nobody was going to tell them no.
The moment he framed it in those terms, it immediately sparked reactions because it touches on a question many people have been quietly considering, but not openly addressing. However, what is making him even more vocal now is the belief that the conversation has moved beyond Harry and Meghan alone and is now centered on what these titles could represent for their children moving forward, which is where the situation becomes significantly more serious and complex. To understand why this is gaining so much attention, many are looking back at past moments that shaped public perception, including that widely discussed interview that, according to Morgan, had a major impact on how the royal family was viewed globally, setting the stage for the ongoing debate that continues to unfold today. During that widely discussed interview, Meghan stated that Archie had not been given a royal title and suggested that the decision was tied to concerns about his background, a claim that quickly spread across global audiences and became one of the most debated moments to come out of that conversation.
Harry and Meghan have never provided any evidence for that highly incendiary claim. It's not like they haven't had the chance to. After all, they pumped out 6 hours of self-indulgent bilge on Netflix, trashing Britain and the press for its racism.
Piers Morgan reacted strongly at the time, arguing that the situation had been misrepresented, pointing to long-established rules that determine how titles are assigned within the royal structure, specifically guidelines that date back generations and apply uniformly rather than selectively. According to those rules, great-grandchildren of a monarch are not automatically granted prince or princess titles, meaning the situation was not unique or targeted, but instead part of a system that has been in place for decades. Morgan has continued to reference this moment as a key turning point, emphasizing the scale of the audience that heard those claims and the impact it had on public perception, especially given that the institution itself does not typically respond directly to such statements.
Harry and Meghan is a bit like criticising the police force. I often criticise the Met Police. My uncle was a commissioner in the Met Police. Doesn't mean that I don't believe in having a police force. You can criticise the monarchy. And say, here are the fault lines, and do it clumsily.
But why would they want to inflict on their children royal titles that make them part of the royal family worldwide and expose them to the misery and pain and trauma which Harry tells us he suffers on an hourly basis, normally for large checks, by the way?
What makes this relevant again now, in the context of ongoing discussions, is that questions around titles, structure, and official standing are once again being brought into focus, with renewed attention on how these long-standing rules apply and how they are interpreted in today's environment, bringing past narratives back into the center of the conversation. Once a situation reaches the point where children's titles become part of a global narrative and are discussed on that scale, it naturally places far greater scrutiny on every detail connected to those titles, leading to increased attention on how they are defined, documented, and understood within the system itself.
Apparently, they invited all the royals to Lilibet's christening, but they all declined to come, as if they're all going to get on a plane and fly to California to embrace the people who've been trashing them for the last 3 years. But it looks like from the jungle drums, they have been invited to the coronation, right? Now, they're holding it out to make it all about them, make it a big drama. So do you think they're actually going to come?
This is where the intensity of the conversation begins to rise, because when such claims are made publicly, it often prompts a closer look at the broader framework, not as a reaction to individuals, but as part of maintaining consistency within established rules and structures. And as more discussions unfold, the tone around the topic has clearly shifted, moving from isolated commentary into something that is being examined more widely. What is adding to that momentum is that Piers Morgan is no longer the only voice raising questions, as reports and commentary from multiple outlets have begun to echo similar themes, suggesting that conversations around titles, roles, and future direction are becoming more active behind the scenes. According to ongoing speculation and reporting, there are suggestions that potential changes could be considered at a structural level, not only in relation to Harry and Meghan, but also in how the system applies more broadly moving forward. While nothing official has been confirmed, the fact that these discussions are gaining traction is enough to place the entire situation under a much brighter spotlight, turning it into a developing story that continues to draw attention as new details emerge. Piers Morgan has been pointing toward this scenario for months, consistently drawing comparisons that he believes highlight a pattern rather than a coincidence, bringing up past situations involving figures like Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson as examples of how proximity to the royal institution can be leveraged in ways that eventually raise serious concerns.
So, concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
What? About how dark your baby is going to be?
Potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Hold up.
There are
Stop
several
right now.
there are several conversations.
There's a
about
conversation with you
with Harry
about how dark your baby is going to be?
potentially, and what that would mean or look like.
Ooh.
His argument centers on the idea that there have been instances where individuals remained closely associated with the royal brand while no longer fulfilling the responsibilities traditionally tied to that position, creating tension between status and role that, over time, becomes difficult to justify within the structure itself.
There's no racism.
No, none at all, and that was actually quite shameful what was said at that time.
Let's remember what she said. This is what she told 50 million people around the world. Watch this.
I do recall it and regret it.
It's worth reminding.
The idea of the first member of color in this family not being titled in the same way that other grandchildren would be, it's not their right to take it away.
From his perspective, the situation now reflects a similar dynamic, where the balance between identity, responsibility, and public positioning is being questioned more openly, especially as scrutiny increases and expectations remain high. The point he continues to emphasize is that this model may not be sustainable in the long term, suggesting that the environment surrounding Harry and Meghan is shifting in a way that could limit how far that approach can go, as attention grows around how titles are used and what they represent moving forward. There is also a growing narrative suggesting that the scale of major deals and media momentum may not be as strong as it once appeared, with some pointing to changes in partnerships and projects as signs that the landscape is shifting, creating a situation where expectations remain high while results are being more closely examined.
Do you think if Kate and William did this,
do you think they'd ever release it?
If they did,
do you think Kate would release a twerking video,
people use headlines
heavily
like that?
pregnant at the bedside?
Would people say things like that?
The thing is, these two will sell anything about their privacy.
A lot of the royal watchers were complaining that they felt like her posts on social media where she barely shows the kids is almost taunting the king, who doesn't know these children, and how unfair this.
From that perspective, the concern being raised is not just about numbers or contracts, but about the balance between maintaining a strong connection to the royal brand and how that connection is perceived when paired with independent ventures, which is exactly the kind of dynamic that figures like William are said to be paying close attention to as they think long-term about protecting the structure of the institution.
Within the royal family that Prince William was forced to deny.
Michael, you want to jump in?
Wasn't right.
I was going to say,
and this is another example.
Yes, I totally agree.
Her Majesty, His Majesty the King has played a blinder in all this because he let it be known from the very outset that they were welcome to come, Meghan and Harry, to the coronation, putting the ball firmly in their court. If they decline, it will make them look small-minded, petty, mean-minded.
What makes this discussion even more significant is the suggestion that any potential changes would not be framed as personal decisions targeting individuals, but as part of a broader policy approach designed to apply consistently across the board, reinforcing the principle that titles are tied to active roles rather than simply identity.
Prince William doubles down. According to multiple sources, it's now a matter of when, not if, he strips Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their royal titles.
This line of thinking has been echoed repeatedly in commentary, highlighting examples of individuals connected to the royal family who have built successful and respected lives without relying on formal titles, strengthening the argument that such a model already exists in practice. At the same time, attention is now shifting toward newer developments that are beginning to surface, with certain details drawing increased focus and adding another layer to a story that continues to evolve and capture widespread interest. There are also claims circulating that Meghan has expressed strong opposition to the idea of any changes to titles, with reports suggesting she would be willing to challenge such a move through legal means if necessary, signaling just how seriously this issue is being taken behind the scenes. That alone has added another layer of intensity to the situation, as it raises questions about how far this could escalate and what options would realistically be available if tensions continue to rise around this topic. From Piers Morgan's perspective, however, the reaction to those claims is immediate and direct, centering on the argument that the structure governing royal titles does not operate within the same framework as typical legal disputes. His point focuses on the idea that titles are granted through the authority of the crown itself, and therefore decisions surrounding them are handled within that same system, rather than being subject to external courts in a conventional sense.
So you can't really put them into the Buckingham Palace and say, look, if you feel like doing any work, do it, and if you don't, because that's not going to be a way that Harry doesn't mind that, which is extraordinary, but it's not a way to do that. And I think if they're going to school and you leave them there with a title, Prince and Princess, they're going to get bullied.
This has fueled further debate about how much influence or recourse actually exists in situations like this, and whether public perception aligns with how the system truly functions behind the scenes. The contrast between expectation and reality is what makes this moment particularly striking, as it highlights just how complex and unique these structures are compared to anything seen in standard legal or public processes. According to the narrative now gaining momentum, the situation has reached a point where tension behind the scenes is being described as significantly heightened, particularly as new claims begin to circulate that go far beyond public image or media debates. This is where the story takes a sharper turn, because the focus is no longer just on titles, public positioning, or legal speculation, but on something being framed as far more serious, drawing attention to discussions that are said to be unfolding quietly within royal circles.
Now they want to give their kids the titles of prince and princess, even though they don't live anywhere near the royal family, they don't do any duties, they do nothing to deserve it. They live in a mansion in Montecito in California and use their own royal titles to make loads of money.
What is being described is not a public process or announcement, but something far more contained, raising curiosity precisely because of how little is being openly confirmed. At the center of these claims is the idea of an internal review connected to official records and how certain details align within established protocols, particularly in relation to documentation and formal standing within the broader structure tied to the crown. Piers Morgan has been vocal in interpreting what such discussions could imply, framing it as a moment that stands out compared to typical developments, but it is important to note that much of this remains within the realm of ongoing reports and speculation rather than confirmed action.
Nobody set out to destroy you. You destroyed yourselves in this country with your ludicrous, hypocritical behaviour. The truth be told, what you just said is complete and utter garbage by the British media, the public and the royal family that they've all now abandoned. That's the truth.
Even so, the way this narrative is evolving, touching on documentation, status, and institutional processes, is what is driving attention, as it suggests a level of scrutiny that goes deeper than anything previously discussed in the public space. From the perspective being discussed, the monarchy has always placed a strong emphasis on clarity and consistency, particularly when it comes to matters that relate to structure and continuity, because uncertainty in those areas can raise deeper questions than any short-term controversy ever could. That is why, according to current narratives, when discussions begin to touch on foundational elements such as documentation and formal records, the attention around them becomes far more intense, as these are the kinds of details that are expected to remain precise, stable, and beyond doubt within such a system. Part of the conversation now being highlighted focuses on how official documents are handled and presented, with claims pointing to changes in how certain details appeared over time, which has led to increased scrutiny and interpretation from commentators like Piers Morgan, who argues that even small adjustments can raise larger questions in a system built on strict protocol. At the same time, it is important to understand that these discussions are being driven largely by reported observations and interpretations rather than confirmed institutional statements, yet they continue to gain traction because they touch on areas that are typically expected to be clear and consistent, making them a focal point in the broader narrative now unfolding. That is where the situation starts to raise even more questions, because in a system built on strict procedure, even a small change to an official document is not something that happens without a clear process behind it, involving requests, approvals, and recorded justification at every step.
Never pregnant at all. Instead, the videos embolden conspiracy theorists. They're calling it Megspiracy, and the pair are being subjected to yet more merciless ridicule.
According to the narrative being pushed, when attempts were made to understand how that change came about, the explanations did not fully align, with different sides offering conflicting accounts about who initiated it and why, creating a situation where there was no single, clearly established version of events, and that lack of consistency is exactly what has fueled further speculation.
Case about whether you think the birth was real, whether you think there was a surrogate, whether you think Meghan was wearing a moon bump. The fact is, Harry and Meghan lied, Buckingham Palace lied on their behalf, there was a complete cover-up over the birth of Prince.
The focus then shifts to the sequence surrounding the birth announcement itself, which traditionally follows a very structured and well-documented process, including medical confirmation, official statements, and clearly verified details presented in a specific order. In this case, however, the timeline has been described as less straightforward, with reports suggesting that information was released in a way that did not fully match the usual pattern, leading to confusion and ongoing debate about how events unfolded. It is these kinds of deviations from established expectations, whether fully explained or not, that continue to draw attention, as they are being interpreted as significant within a system where consistency is normally considered essential. The announcement itself is another detail that continues to draw attention, especially when compared to previous royal births that followed a clearly established format, including formal confirmation from attending medical professionals.
They decide, okay, well, we have to come out and show the baby in some way, but we're not coming out to the street. The filthy masses are not going to have anything to do with our kid. So then they show up, and there's Meghan in her white dress with Harry, and he's holding this completely still baby.
In this case, the absence of those standard elements has been highlighted repeatedly in commentary, with Piers Morgan pointing to it as something that stands out within a system where such details are typically considered essential rather than optional. From that perspective, these signatures are not seen as ceremonial, but as part of a process designed to ensure clarity and verification, which is why their absence has become a focal point in ongoing discussions. The attention then shifts even more toward Lilibet's birth, which took place in a completely different setting and followed a different structure altogether, being handled through private channels rather than the traditional royal framework. This has led to comparisons with previous protocols, noting the lack of involvement from royal medical staff and the absence of the usual public-facing steps that are often associated with such announcements. While there are clear differences due to location and circumstance, these variations are being closely examined within the broader narrative, as they continue to raise questions about how established procedures apply in situations that fall outside the traditional environment. For a celebrity, a private and controlled approach to moments like this would be completely normal and expected, but when it comes to someone connected to the line of succession, the standards and expectations have historically been very different, built on centuries of consistent protocol designed to ensure clarity, verification, and continuity. That is why the differences being pointed out are drawing so much attention, because they represent a departure from patterns that have remained largely unchanged for generations, and according to current discussions, this is exactly the kind of shift that is now being looked at more closely within royal circles.
They kept telling the world how ghastly the monarchy is. It's a prison camp. All the royals want to get away from it, but they can't because they're trapped in the world of titles and privilege. And now they want to give their kids the titles of prince and princess, even though they don't live anywhere near the royal family. They don't do any duties. They do nothing to deserve it. They live in a mansion in Montecito in California.
The conversation becomes even more intense when it turns to details surrounding ceremonial records, particularly those tied to events that traditionally hold both symbolic and formal significance within the system. Claims have surfaced suggesting that certain records are not easily traceable in the way some expected, which has added another layer of speculation and debate, especially as commentators like Piers Morgan emphasize the importance of such moments within royal tradition. At the same time, it is important to recognize that many of these points are being discussed based on reported observations and interpretations rather than confirmed institutional findings, yet they continue to generate attention because they touch on areas where consistency has historically been seen as essential. Within the traditional framework, moments like a christening are often described as more than symbolic, carrying institutional meaning that connects royal life with long-standing religious structures, which is why discussions around documentation and records in this area tend to attract such close attention. When questions are raised about how those processes are handled, it naturally leads to broader conversations about consistency, protocol, and how these elements fit within the overall system. At the same time, much of what is being circulated remains part of ongoing commentary and interpretation, rather than confirmed conclusions. Yet the intensity of the discussion itself reflects how sensitive and significant these topics are considered to be.
That it just really kind of boggles the mind. I mean, just for titles, for example. So when Archie was first born, they said they didn't want him to have a title. He was going to be a private citizen. I was like, bravo, you understand. He's not going to be a working member of the royal family. He is going to have to live a normal life, get a normal job. That is fantastic. And then it came out later in the Oprah Winfrey interview. Well, they denied him a title and security because he is a mixed race child. And then it was kind of like,
what adds another layer to this situation is how different the narrative behind the scenes is described compared to the carefully curated image presented publicly, creating a contrast that continues to fuel speculation and debate. Piers Morgan has been increasingly vocal in arguing that a significant portion of Meghan's current positioning, spanning branding, media projects, and public perception, has been closely tied to the broader association with the royal institution. His argument centers on the idea that if that connection were to shift in any meaningful way, it could have a ripple effect on how everything is perceived and valued moving forward, raising larger questions about identity, positioning, and long-term direction in a space where image and association play a critical role. And when it comes to Harry, Piers Morgan has pointed out what he believes is a crucial detail that often gets lost in the wider noise of the conversation. The idea that Harry may have genuinely believed that regardless of distance, regardless of stepping away, and regardless of building a life outside the UK, that connection to the crown would remain constant and unchangeable for his children. From that perspective, the assumption would be that their royal identity was something permanent. something that could not be altered by circumstance or location, and that belief is now being tested against a system that operates very differently when it comes to structure and authority. According to ongoing narratives, there are suggestions that attempts to reach out within royal circles have not led to clear responses, reinforcing the idea that once discussions move into formal or constitutional territory, personal dynamics and emotions carry far less influence than the rules and frameworks that guide decisions at that level.
They're legally covering their backs. There's just too many unknowns. And then, of course, we have that the doctor that allegedly delivered Lily quit her practice 2 weeks after giving birth to Lily or delivering Lily. That sentence there is missing.
At the same time, Piers Morgan has directed some of his strongest criticism toward King Charles, arguing that there have been multiple moments in the past where more decisive action could have been taken, but instead a more restrained approach was chosen. That contrast between waiting and acting has now become part of the wider debate as attention shifts toward what decisions may or may not come next. Time and time again, Piers Morgan has returned to the same argument, that hesitation only delays the inevitable and allows a larger issue to build in the background until it can no longer be ignored. And from his perspective, that moment has now arrived in full force. What he emphasizes is that the situation has effectively moved beyond a stage where it can be managed quietly, placing it directly into William's hands, someone he describes as far more likely to approach it with clarity and decisiveness.
Harry and Meghan playing games that resulted in people unnecessarily questioning things. Again, every toxicity thing is result of them.
The reasoning behind that view is rooted in the belief that William has observed the situation unfold over time, understands what is at stake for the future of the institution, and is ultimately focused on protecting its long-term stability, especially with the next generation, George, Charlotte, and Louis, representing what comes next. According to those closely following the current discussions, several possible directions are being considered when it comes to how situations like this could be handled within the system, each reflecting a different level of adjustment rather than a single immediate outcome. One scenario being discussed is a more subtle approach, where titles remain in place formally but are no longer actively emphasized or recognized in public-facing contexts, gradually reducing their visibility over time. Another possibility involves a more defined structural shift, where roles and recognition are quietly adjusted without major announcements, creating a clearer separation between official representation and private life. And then there is a third scenario, often described as the most direct, which would involve a more explicit redefinition of how titles and status are applied, signaling a stronger move toward clarity and long-term consistency within the system.
Harry and Meghan, it's more a case of never reign and never abstain, especially when it comes to nauseating self-publicity, which invariably backfires.
The most direct outcome being discussed is the possibility of formal removal, a scenario that, according to ongoing commentary, would come into play only if established standards and protocols were determined not to align with the expectations set within the system, allowing the institution to act within its own framework to redefine titles and official recognition without the need for public escalation. In that context, the emphasis is not on emotion or conflict, but on maintaining consistency and protecting the structure that has governed these processes for generations, reinforcing the idea that decisions at this level are guided by rules and precedent rather than external pressure or narrative.
Meghan's Netflix series, released to the world this morning, is packed with, well, not really revelations, are they? It's sort of rehashed old revelations with a new twist. As it turns out, we've apparently been wrong all along. Britain is a nasty, racist hellhole, where only magnificent Meghan stood up to all this and the world's biggest victim.
Piers Morgan's overall stance remains unchanged, but the weight behind it has clearly intensified, centering on the belief that institutions like the monarchy are designed to endure beyond any individual moment, adapting when necessary while preserving their core identity. From that perspective, the contrast becomes clear. While public figures build influence through visibility and perception, the authority behind the system itself operates through established mechanisms that ultimately determine how everything is defined and recognized. And that is what makes this situation so compelling to watch, because whether handled publicly or quietly, it raises a question that continues to linger. Should decisions like this be fully revealed or managed behind closed doors as part of the institution's internal process? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Palace Loop for more stories like this, because one thing is certain, this story is far from over.